Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I'm bringing you another book review, this time one for a book that was not on my TBR video, if you have seen that. This was kind of a surprise read for me because it's one that I just got not too long ago and wanted to read it. And that is Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. So Tress of the Emerald Sea is the first of Brandon Sanderson's 4 secret project novels that he announced last year that actually led to the most successful Kickstarter of all time at this moment. And this is the first of those books. This is technically a new release because the regular hardcover came out earlier this month. The ebook and audiobook did go up at the beginning of the year, and also the exclusive premium hardcover also came out earlier this year, but I didn't get any of those because at the time the Kickstarter was happening, I was just starting to get into Sanderson. So unfortunately I was not able to contribute to that. And even if I had been a fan of his works at that point, I probably wouldn't have been able to afford to get all of the fancy stuff that was coming with that. But I did get this hardcover because it came out recently, and I read it in a few days, and I just had such a blast with this book. So start out with some positives. First of all, the big thing for me with this book was just the uniqueness of it and just how fun it was to read. I would say that out of the books that I have read in quite a decent amount of time, this is probably some of the most just pure fun that I've had reading a book. It was just so fun and whimsical and funny. There was a lot of comedy in this book. Compared to most books that I have read, this is probably funnier than a lot of them as far as like pure laughs per page. It was just, I was constantly laughing at this book. But I just loved the feel and the tone and the funness of this book. I don't even know if that's a word. But I just had such a fun time with this one. It's got a very unique tone to it. It feels very fairy tale-esque, which makes sense because Brandon said he was inspired by The Princess Bride for this book. So it definitely has that kind of whimsical fairy tale-like feel to it. Just the general feel and idea of this book was very unique. Essentially, it follows Tress, who is the main character, who is going after this person that she loves because he was taken away from her, and she has to basically travel across the world to get to him. And as a part of that, she ends up on a ship that crosses several different seas, which are very interesting. They are not made up of water, but they're made up of spores, which all have unique qualities. There's different kinds of ones, so you have certain ones, there's like the Emerald Sea, there's the Crimson Sea, there's a few other ones as well. And each of those have different effects when they are touched with water, I believe. And also, it's possible for the sea to basically just stop moving. So if you're on a ship, you're kind of stuck there for a little while. So it's super cool world building, but she basically has to travel across the world in order to get back this person that she loves. And it just has a very unique feel to it. You know, that kind of a story is not really something that I would have expected Brandon to write. And so it was just fun to read something super different, super unique, and just very light and fun and all that stuff. And also, building off of the whole funny thing, the narration of this book is excellent. It's just, again, it's very funny. There's a lot of jokes and little clever things here and there. For the sake of not spoiling things, I'm not going to say what point of view this book takes place from, but it is wonderful and I loved it. And also, I really enjoyed the plot and the characters in this book. I would say not as much as some of Sanderson's other stuff, like Stormlight or Mistborn or things like that. I probably prefer the characters and the plot in those, but that was still enjoyable in this book. This had, you know, a fairly simple plot of Tress needs to get on a boat and go to this place where the person that she is chasing after ended up. So it's a pretty simple plot, but it's one that is enjoyable and it leads to some interesting stuff going on. The crew of the ship that she ends up on is pretty fun. Again, didn't find a lot of those characters super fantastic. Like, you don't have a character, at least in my opinion, like Vin or Kaladin or Light Song or Vivenna or any of those other characters that I love from his other books that really stood out to me really heavily. but they were all very enjoyable. They had some nice dynamics with each other, and they're all pretty unique, and there's some interesting stuff going on with some of them. I also really enjoyed the wider Cosmere references in this book. I've caught a little bit of it in Stormlight as well, but this book is really the one where, now I've read half a dozen or so Cosmere books, and so I was catching little references here and there to different things, and that was a lot of fun. You don't have to have read the wider Cosmere in order to understand what's going on with this book, but if you have, then you'll have a lot of fun pointing out little different things here and there in this book. So that was a lot of fun as well. As far as the negative points of this book, I don't really have any big ones. The only thing that I really would say is, again, the plot and the characters weren't quite there for me. Still did enjoy them quite a bit, but they weren't as memorable as several of the other Brandon Sanderson characters that I've read, or the plots that I've read, or things like that. But really, it was still just a fun, enjoyable read, so that wasn't really a big thing for me. Plus, I still had aspects of this book that I adored, like the world building and the narrative voice and the tone and all these things. So there definitely were still some parts of this book that I absolutely loved. It just wasn't the ones that I normally would love. And very quickly, I do have a couple of spoiler points that I want to touch on, so if you have not read this book already, then you may want to stop here, or maybe if I remember, I might put some timestamps in the description. Hopefully I may remember to do that. But I don't have a lot of spoiler thoughts on this book, just a couple things I'd like to mention. First of all, like I said, the point of view of the narrator, of course, is Hoyd, who is one of the I don't know if he would be one of the main Cosmere characters necessarily, but he is a character that appears throughout the Cosmere, and he is the narrator of this book, and he's on the ship that Tress is on. And again, he was just wonderful. The way he kind of interjected little, kind of breaking the fourth wall a little bit, where it was stopping, telling the story, and directly addressing the reader was a lot of fun. And the different little jokes that he would talk about and little things that he would say here and there. Like I said, so many laugh out loud moments for me with this book. And Hoyd in general is just always a lot of fun for me, so I really enjoyed that. The only other really big spoiler thing I want to talk about is the dragon, which comes in, I want to say 2/3 of the way through the book, 3/4, somewhere around there. Which I'm not really going to talk about the ending of this book, because again, I don't really feel like I have really in-depth thoughts that I feel like going into with that, but I do want to talk about the dragon really quick, because I love the way this was done. Because, and I was talking to some friends about this as well, about this aspect of the book. Most fantasy books, most fantasy authors, when they use a dragon in their book, you're thinking, oh cool, it's a dragon, but that's like a very typical fantasy thing, so it doesn't feel exciting. I mean, it probably might feel exciting, but it's not like, oh my goodness, there's a dragon. But Brandon Sanderson, at least from what I have read so far, has not included a dragon in his books. So when I saw that there was going to be a dragon in this book, I was like, oh my goodness, there's going to be a dragon in this book. And I just found that really funny. The fact that even though dragons are this very typical sort of thing that shows up in a lot of fantasy books, because Sanderson hasn't really used them before, and he just kind of threw one in here as a nice surprise, it was just a funny experience to kind of look at that thing that usually would be very typical, and be really excited about it. But that's pretty much all I've got to say about this book. Honestly, a little less than I expected to have to say, but really, I just enjoyed this one quite a bit. It was a lot of fun, and yeah, it was just a generally really fun read. As far as a rating out of 10 that I would give this, I think I would give it an 8.5. I considered giving it a 9, but I think that maybe is just slightly too high for me, mainly because some of his other books I would probably give a 9 as well, and even though my enjoyment of this book was probably on a similar level, again, the plot and the characters, which are very important to me, but enjoyment also is a big factor, so I probably could give this a 9, but I would say I prefer those books, so putting this on the same level just feels a little weird to me. So 8.5 out of 10, definitely a very, very good score. Definitely would recommend checking this book out. I do want to mention real quick, because this is a standalone, I don't know how many people are talking about this or asking about this, but I do want to address, you know, if you're not into Sanderson already, because this is a standalone, would I recommend reading this as a first book? And I think you certainly could, because again, it is a standalone, even though it includes a lot of wider Cosmere references and things of that nature. You could theoretically read this as a first book, however, I would not recommend doing so. Mainly because, as I said earlier, one of my favorite things about this was how unique it was from Sanderson's other stuff. And I think if you're going to start reading Brandon Sanderson, you should probably stick with something that feels more like his usual. So while you could read this first if you really wanted to, I think that sticking with something else like Mistborn, or even if you want to dive right into the deep end, Stormlight Archive, or even some of the other standalones would probably work better. But I think this is a good one to read after you've read a few other things, just so you kind of know that you're into his stuff. So that way when you read this and it's very different, you know, it's not like you're reading this for the first time and then expecting everything else to be exactly like this, because it is very different. But anyways, that is pretty much all I got for you today, so let me know down in the comments if you have read this book and what you thought of it, if you also loved it or maybe didn't love it. The general response that I have seen to this book has been overwhelmingly positive, which is awesome. I was a little bit concerned, I'm not terribly concerned, because after I had read some Brandon Sanderson, I absolutely love his stuff. But I was a little bit worried about this being the biggest Kickstarter of all time and then having the books kind of be duds. And while the second secret project, it seems to me, has gotten a little bit more of a mixed reception than this one, I am so glad that this one did as well as it has, and has gotten such a positive reception, because, you know, I think it would have been really nerve-wracking a little bit if this one had not. But I'm just very glad that people are loving this book, and I also love this book and all that stuff, so yay. So anyways, that's pretty much all I got for you today. So thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time.